Hi everyone, I'm Richelle Newson from Angle & Volkers, Vancouver Island North. I'm here today with Ashley Smith from Burger Smith Urdahl, your Fifth Street Lawyers and Notaries. Had to roll with the tagline.
Thank you.
Today we are going to be helping to demystify the home buying process, and very excited to ask you a couple questions.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Ashley, can you explain the role of a lawyer or notary in a real estate transaction?
So the lawyer or notary is really the last piece of the puzzle,
Okay.
quite frankly. Somebody's interested in buying a house, they've already talked to their mortgage broker about getting financing, and they've come to see someone like you, and they've found their property, they've done their due diligence with your help, they've drafted a contract with your help, and then the contract becomes binding, and that's really when we get involved.
Okay.
Sometimes before that, the realtor might ask us to review title or something like that, which is, before
Standard
the end.
procedure, yeah.
But at the time we get the file, then usually it's a binding contract in place.
Right.
And what the lawyer and notary do, quite simply, is we take care of the legal transfer of title from a seller to a purchaser, and we deal with the exchange of money.
Okay.
Usually that requires undertakings on the part of the seller's lawyer and the purchasing lawyer. Examples of that might include things like I, as the purchasing lawyer, would put the seller's lawyer on an undertaking to remove their mortgage off title.
Okay.
Right? Something like that.
Right.
And then when the title has transferred, I'll back up just a bit. Right before the transaction, we recheck title to make sure there's nothing on it that's going to hurt the purchaser's ownership of the property.
Okay.
When the title has transferred and the money's changed hands, then we will order a new state of title certificate which shows the new owner on title. And that's the end of our involvement in it.
Amazing. So you are reviewing the title, handling the financial exchange, and registering the title to the new owner, double checking everything's tickety-boo.
A large part of that in that is if you're getting a mortgage, it's important for buyers to understand that we act for you and your lender at that time. So there's a lot of moving parts in the transaction. So we're dealing sometimes with mortgage brokers, with the bank itself, with the realtor, and then with the purchaser.
Okay.
Yeah, and the lender, the seller's lawyer as well.
Right, that makes sense. So from the time of subject removal, how much time do the lawyers and notaries need to be able to process everything in a,
That's a great question, because the more time you give us, the better
Right.
it is. I know that the sort of concept of how smooth it goes really has to do with how much communication you have with your lawyer.
Okay.
For example, if the completion date is 3 months out, you're probably not going to hear from the lawyer early on.
Right.
But we require things ahead of when you're coming in to sign a document as a purchaser. So we need to liaise with the other side, with the selling lawyer. We need to get instructions from your lender.
Right.
So there's lots of moving parts. We have to order insurance binders. We have to talk to Stewart Title or whichever title company you're getting your insurance from. So there's a few steps that happen long before you come in and sign your documents with your lawyer. So the earlier that you retain your lawyer or your notary, they will get you on their list and open a file and start looking into the things that they need to do. So as soon as you have a binding contract, it's a really good idea to connect with your lawyer
right away. Okay. And would you say you need kind of like a 10-day or 2-week minimum?
It will depend on how busy.
Right.
That is a really interesting question.
Loaded question.
Right now it's not as busy. It's fall and the market has slowed down. If you'd asked me last summer, quite frankly, it depends on how many files that the lawyer or notary are dealing with. There's only a certain amount of capacity that each firm can take. We have a very efficient experienced team of conveyancers, and they can do a lot of work, but it depends on how many files.
If you're maxed out, you're maxed out.
So if you think, well, I'm going to wait till 10 days before, and you call an office and they say, we don't have any capacity to do this. But I would say more time than 10 days, largely because of the ordering of mortgage instructions and things like that. Sometimes the banks have certain timelines that they require.
Right.
We make the request within a certain time frame. So the more time you can give us, the better.
Okay.
We can do short closes, but it
you need to
depends.
call in advance and make sure that it's tickety-boo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. What are some of the benefits, in your opinion, of working with a realtor? And, you know, from a legal standpoint, are there kind of pros to that?
In my opinion, absolutely. I think that a lot of people see a realtor as somebody that's going to find them the right house. But in fact, I think your role is much more important than that, in the sense that this is the biggest financial transaction of most people's lives. Not everybody, of course, but when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars and a legally binding contract that's going to be the result of this, it's pretty important to have a realtor that knows what they're doing and understands the entire process. So for me, it starts with due diligence. Realtors are able to help people do their own due diligence. So when I talk about due diligence, I think of things like ensuring you have financing in place, making inquiries with the municipality, maybe whether or not the property is going to work for you or not, having the title reviewed and making sure that it's the right property. So it's not just about finding the right house, which is part of that.
Of course.
Is the school, catchment what you're looking for? What are the plans for the green space behind your property? Things like that. Lawyers don't do that.
Right.
By the time we get the contract, it's already a binding contract. So you need a professional that is making sure that all of those ducks have been, or not ducks,
they're all in a row. All the boxes are being ticked.
Exactly,
the
prior
due
to
diligence.
it coming to us.
Right.
The due diligence is a big part of it. And they can help people, guide them through this process, so it's not as simple as just finding the right house. It's all of the things in between that. You understand things like subjects that protect the buyer, and those subjects, when they get removed, does create a binding contract. So if the contracts are poorly written, for example, and we have seen poorly written contracts, whether a court would uphold that contract becomes a real question. So it's important to have a real estate agent that knows how to properly draft contracts and understands what those contracts hold.
Right. Makes
So
sense.
yes, I do think it's really important to have a proper legal contract drafted. That's the biggest part for me that I see. And if they're done wrong, it can create a lot of problems. So by having somebody who knows what they're doing, and they can connect you with the right people, for example, you can connect with home inspectors, you can connect with the builders, you can connect with the mortgage brokers,
lawyers.
and lawyers, exactly. So to me, by having somebody guide you in that process, it's well worth it, I think.
Yeah. Great. That's awesome. Share with us what are some of the challenges that arise in a real estate transaction?
I can.
Okay.
I could
Enlighten me, please.
I could probably go on for quite a while on this, but a few examples.
Writing a book. Just kidding.
Exactly. A few of the challenges that we find that arise, as I say, when I was talking to you before, I came up with a few that I really noticed. Going back to that due diligence conversation about the benefit of having the realtor help you with that. If you haven't done proper due diligence and a deal closes, and then you come back to the lawyer after the fact and say, well, something wasn't right, or something, I thought this and it's not. That goes back to your due diligence. If you had the opportunity to have an inspection and you didn't, and then you want to come back later and say, well, I don't know, there looks like there was water damage. Oftentimes a court may say, well, you had your opportunity to have those things inspected. I'm not saying that is what would be the result. We saw last year, when it was so busy, a lot of offers were having to be made in order to get a property with no subjects. And what we were finding is then after the fact, problems kept arising because people weren't able to get their due diligence done. I've seen it arise even with financing. People assume they have a portability in their mortgage, but they didn't check with their lender. So they made their offer not subject to financing, and then their lender says, no, sorry, that wasn't a portable
And then they're
option.
on the hook to buy it anyways.
Exactly. So these are the kind of things that if you don't do your due diligence,
you can get into hot water.
absolutely. Again, poorly drafted contracts. Again, if you use a professional that knows how to draft a contract and one that has a relationship with their lawyers and notaries, they might say, what are your thoughts on this? The lawyer can suggest maybe different things. A good example of that might be a holdback. These are things that we see constantly that aren't flushed out in contracts. An example might be that you're going to hold back $5,000 because you want the seller to paint a room. And really, what does that mean? It would be better to just figure out what that cost might be and take that off the purchase price. Something like that, than having to deal with an after the fact disagreement maybe on whether it was done right and in the right color and things like that. So
try to simplify things.
Simplifying is better for sure. And then there's no question what the intention was. And there's no opinion about things after the fact.
But we're talking about holdbacks between a buyer and a seller, not between a builder who would also be a seller. But
that is a little bit more common, and I don't see as many problems with the contracts between builder and buyer, because oftentimes they're into the house. Either builders have let them in before things are fully completed. Maybe they need to complete the yard. They've moved
fencing,
in. Exactly. So those types of things are more common. I don't see as many problems with builders because they're their own profession and they have reputations to uphold. So they're not about to not finish a job or things like that. And also, oftentimes with the builders, there will be some sort of a contract in place about the quality of materials, about the types of fixtures and things like that. So it's a little less gray, I think, when it comes to builders. Of course, we're not talking about builders' lien holdbacks. That's something completely different you can talk to your lawyer about. So the other issue I would say that has arisen that we see a big problem with is back-to-back purchases and sales. That is an issue that oftentimes we have people selling and then buying, and oftentimes we see the same date being used. And what people really need to understand is there are so many stakeholders that oftentimes it can't come together on the same day. And so and it can create a domino effect of problems down the line. Think that if you're selling your house to me and I'm purchasing and selling a house, so there could be a domino effect down the road. And so by using the same day, for example, of completion, I can't actually complete your sale unless I have funds in my trust account. Well, if the seller hasn't been able to get the trust account, the money to me in time to complete your purchase because the banks have closed, now we've got a discrepancy and we can't complete when you said you were going to complete. So I've seen domino effects from not looking at the timelines. Sometimes people are buying and selling in other provinces, and other provinces have different land title requirements than BC, so it's not electronic in some provinces. So oftentimes we're waiting for funds from Ontario from a sale or something like that. So there's lots of moving parts to it, and so back-to-back purchases and sales can cause a little bit of difficulty. The other thing that comes up is people not understanding that they need to be around when their sale completes. I think we are all lulled into this idea that everything is electronic now, and because they can sign their contract with you electronically and they've done their banking, but land title actually requires a physical signature. And so we've had situations where we call to make appointments with people and they say, well, I'm in Mexico. And you say, well, no, we need to be here. Or, or they're, those are just the types of things, or they're out of the country when we need them to sign documents. You need to be around. Other little things like not having ID, that, I had my ID stolen or something like that. I can't complete a deal if I don't have your ID. These are problems where people come and say, I don't have my actual driver's license, but I'm under an obligation to verify your ID for your mortgage company, things like that. So it can create a bit of a nightmare that people don't really think down the line. There's not much you can do about that, but for clients, they should be thinking about asking the lawyer, what am I going to need? Am I going to need to be around Don't set a closing if your daughter's wedding's happening in Maui, right? That kind of thing. So those are things for people to keep in mind.
All right. A couple hot tips in there.
Yeah.
Do your due diligence. Don't leave the country when you're closing the house.
Exactly. Try not to do holdbacks. Clean up your holdbacks.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
What is a completion and adjustment day, and how do lawyers help make this process more seamless?
So the completion date is really the date the money changes hands between lawyers, and the title is transferred from the seller to the purchaser.
Okay.
That is the completion date. Adjustment dates are dates that we adjust taxes, strata fees, rent adjustments, utilities, anything like that. So adjustment dates, depending on when the deal closes and when the adjustment date is, they're usually the same day. Usually completion and adjustment is the same day. Sometimes we have adjustment and possession as the same day, depending on the type of transaction. But on a typical, they're often all same day, or possessions the next day, and adjustment and completion are on one day. The adjustment is if it's in the first, for example, with taxes, I'll give you an example with taxes. That's a big one people don't really understand, is that in British Columbia, we pay our taxes in the middle of the year for the entire year. So in July of 2023, we will pay the taxes for all of 2023. So if you purchase a house in the beginning of the year, there will be a tax credit for you from the seller. The seller has to pay you for their days of 2023 that they owned the house, because in July, the purchaser pays the whole bill. So obviously you have to be reimbursed on those adjustments. If you buy in the last half of the year though, you're going to actually pay back the vendor for the days you're going to own the house. So those are the types of adjustments. Even things as small as a strata fee. So say you moved in on the 15th of the month and the strata fees are $300, you have to pay half of that strata fee that the vendor has already paid. So those are the adjustments that we do. But largely that's it.
So title and funds transfer on completion day, and we do the statement of adjustments generally on the same day. And you've got a wonderful list and magical spreadsheet, I'm sure.
Adjustments often give rise, when you see a lawyer, the lawyer should be taking the time to explain all of that. We're gonna, it all comes on a statement of adjustments at the end, but the adjustments in the contract is the day that we use to do those calculations.
Makes sense. Awesome. Great answer.
Thanks.
We're really demystifying things over here. So we've talked about the completion and adjustment day. Now, specifically with the statement of adjustments, you touched a little bit on this, but what kind of things can we see on the statement of adjustments?
So they're pretty standard, regardless of which law office you use. There will be, it speaks to the transaction at the top, who the buyer and the sellers are, and the land description. It'll say the completion date, so the date the money changes hands, the adjustment date, the date we adjust for taxes and things, and the possession date, when you actually get the keys from your realtor. So on it seems somewhat straightforward in the sense that it's debit and credit. So it's very much you're debited and credited, and then at the end, there's a number that you have to bring me to complete this deal. So typically you're debited for a purchaser. There's a different statement of adjustments for a purchaser than a vendor, but let's talk about the purchaser. So you're debited with the sale price. So you're dinged with the sale price.
Of course.
You're also debited with things like possibly taxes if it's at the beginning of the year. You might be debited with property transfer tax. You will be debited for possibly the cost to get a strata form. You might be debited for the legal fees. Those are the types of things you get debited for. Title insurance is another thing that you'll get debited for. But you're credited with your mortgage proceeds. You're credited with the deposit that you gave to your realtor when you made your offer. You may be credited, depending on that timing again, with taxes or utilities or something like that when we talked about adjustments. And then we need a certain amount of money to close this deal, and that's where the lawyer will say to you, we need you to bring us a bank draft in X amount of dollars to complete this deal. And that usually, that dollar is where your down payment has come.
Right.
That's what that down payment is for,
Right.
those extra costs that
Right.
come up over and above what your mortgage has provided.
Okay, I actually wanted to ask you, in a contract of purchase and sale, you leave a deposit as a show of good faith. It gets held in trust. So can people use that as part of their down payment?
It is credited on your statement of adjustments
Yes.
because you've given the deposit. So that is shown as a credit on your statement of adjustments.
So you can allocate it there if you need to.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's where it's showing.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Awesome, thank you.
Yes.
This is great. Let's talk about a title.
Okay.
What is a title? Why is it important? Why should you have your lawyer or notary review your title before you remove subjects?
So the stated title certificate not only tells you who the registered owner of the property is and gives legal land descriptions, things like that. What's important to understand is that it also shows encumbrances against the property. So some encumbrances stay on the property. An example of that might be the E&N Railway. It has rights to undersurface rights throughout the province largely.
Yeah.
It's been on most of the properties since the early 1900s. There's an example of something you're never going to get off. It's not really going to hurt your ownership of the property.
Right.
However, if the seller has a mortgage, I need to know that because they need to remove it. We would look for things that might hurt your ownership, such as a builder's lien.
Right.
If it was a new build, has the builder paid their sub trades, or has there been work that's given rise to a builder's lien? So we would check that. Maybe a seller has a family matter that there has been a certificate of pending litigation put on that property by an ex-spouse. There might be some sort of easement on the back of the property, and there's some standard ones, TELUS, BC Hydro, things like that that aren't too much to worry about. But if there was an easement across the back of the property, for example, and the purchaser thought, well, there's a permanent shop built there, you may want to look into whether or not
It's within the setback
exactly.
requirements. Yeah.
Or maybe you plan to build a shop and you need to understand that you can't build over that easement.
Right.
So that's the type of thing that why title is important.
Okay.
The other thing that I think is important when you're a purchaser is to understand that when this transaction's done, on title will show things like your own mortgage, their first charge on title.
Okay.
Other things that show, if you maybe are deferring taxes, that would show on your title. If there was bylaw infringements or something like that, that would be showing on title.
Okay,
So we
so
would
a lot
want
of useful information there.
we would want those things removed, and that's what we do. If we were acting for the buyer, we might say, we will give you the buyer's money in exchange for you removing these things. Those are what undertakings are between lawyers and notaries. Or perhaps we say, you don't want to buy this because they need to get this family law matter resolved.
Yeah,
right?
and it could take months or years or...
You don't want somebody else's legal problems on your title.
Right.
You want clear title when you purchase property. You'll have your own things put on title, like your own mortgage.
Yeah,
So the other important part is how you go on title. If you're a single person, it's fairly straightforward. But if you're married, you may want to go on as joint tenants.
Right.
Maybe you're buying a house with your best friend. You may want to go on as tenants in common. So there's different ways to hold title as well.
Yeah.
And it's really important to understand how you're holding title, and your lawyer and notary can talk to you about how the best way to hold title is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you explain the difference between...
Absolutely. So joint tenancy has a right of survivorship.
Okay.
So if you and your husband own a house as joint tenants and one of you passes,
Heaven forbid.
heaven forbid, yes, of course, then it will transfer to the surviving joint tenant.
Okay.
Without it having to go through probate.
Right.
If you own it as tenants in common, so you each own 50-50 or 30-70, so with tenants in common, there can be a division of that title. Then if one of you passed away, it would have to be probated through your will and executed, go to whoever your will said that your estate was going to. So between couples, it's very common to be joint tenancy. That's typically how we recommend it, but not always. So it always depends on the person's desire when they die, where they want their property to go. But it's really important to understand that when people are buying property.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure.
The other place it can come up is if you have had to have your parents co-sign a mortgage,
Okay.
right? So sometimes the bank requires your parents to go on title, but they'll only go on for a very small percentage, things like that.
Right. So then you need to be clear on what kind of
Absolutely.
agreement you want to have in place.
And sometimes it's a requirement of the mortgage as opposed to an agreement just between you. So it's really important. Your mortgage broker would talk to you about that, and your mortgage company would have requirements. But really, you should be asking, the lawyer should be confirming with you how you want to be shown on title.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. So Ashley, what is title insurance? Why is it important? And what are the costs associated with getting title insurance?
Title insurance is an insurance policy that for lenders and homeowners that insures them against risks associated with title.
Okay.
So they replace what used to be survey certificates. Now lenders require them largely for fraud reasons, but they can also protect a homeowner from things on title they may not know about. For example, encroachments that you couldn't have known about when you bought the property. Good example might be maybe the driveway is a foot onto the neighbor's property. That might be an encroachment that you weren't aware of on title. So there are several insurance companies that sell it. I do want to make it clear that lawyers and notaries don't sell insurance. We offer it to you.
Okay.
The lender requires it all the time. Every lender, whether it's a private lender or a bank, they require it. That policy is $125 typically. And then you can piggyback on that.
Like yearly?
No, it is a one-time charge.
Oh, wow.
Every time you get a mortgage though.
Okay.
So if you get a 5-year mortgage, you'll probably have to get it again next time you renew.
Okay.
But you can piggyback off their policy and add a $50 homeowner policy as well. So, and as I say, we don't sell it. We ask people if they are interested in having this as well. If they say, we do explain it's a one-time charge. If you're interested, we send them the information.
Right, and they can take care of it themselves.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, they tell us to buy it for them, but we don't sell it, essentially. It is insurance policy. So if you're thinking, some people say, no, I'm happy with it. Maybe they bought property from their grandpa and it's been in the family for 100 years. They're well aware of what the encroachments are. They don't need the policy. That's fine, but the lender may still require it. So if you just have a lender policy, it's about $125, and if you have the additional, it's usually $175.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it something, if you don't necessarily know who you're purchasing from, is that something that you would generally recommend to people?
Well, insurance is a good thing to have.
Yeah. When you need it, you really need it.
Yeah, that's the thing. And if you talk to any of the insurance companies, they can give you really interesting examples of when these things have come up. The driveway one has come up. Perhaps a fence has been put on the fence. A neighbor situation has arisen where now the new neighbor says that's 2 feet on my property and you had no way of knowing it. So now the fence needs to be replaced, and that might be something that your title insurance will cover for you because you had no way of knowing that.
Right.
So I do think for $50 it might be worth
Feels
it. But
like a no-brainer.
It's up to people. Sometimes people don't want to spend the money, but it is a
Teach
one-time
their own.
charge until they renew their mortgage. Then the new mortgage will require it again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying that.
No problem.
Yeah. So what are some of the other closing costs people can expect in a real estate transaction from a legal standpoint?
So we've got obviously legal expenses. There are disbursements that are paid out when you, so legal fees, but those are separate from disbursements. So things that we've spent money on, ordering title, registering title, things like that. You will have property transfer tax in most cases, unless you're exempt from property transfer tax, and we can talk about that. You'll have we might have to order forms from your strata company if you're buying into a strata unit, and those, they depend. Sometimes they charge us $40 for that. Sometimes they charge us $150.
And that would fall under disbursement?
No, those would be your closing costs that we pay separate to those companies. What other types of closing costs? Those are generally it. Taxes and disbursements, property transfer tax. There might be GST on a new home build. That might be something that's payable. Generally, I think that's most of the things. There's if there are other adjustments or anything like that, we would let you know. I mean,
Yeah.
people often know what the closing costs are before they come in to see us. We typically send it to them so they're aware of what their costs are going to be.
Right. I just want to quickly circle back. You mentioned property transfer tax as something that comes up as far as, you know, closing costs goes. Can you explain what that is?
I can, and it's a big hit. If people aren't expecting it, it can be a big hit, in particular because our housing prices are getting so high here.
Right.
So property transfer tax is payable. It's 1% on the first 200,000, and then 2% on everything up to 2 million, and then 3% and above.
Okay.
So potentially it's a lot of money. There are some exemptions. Unfortunately, the exemptions haven't really caught up with the market increase. So there are exemptions for first-time home buyers if the property is less than $525,000. There is partial exemptions for first-time home buyers up to $600,000. But it's very important for first-time home buyers to understand they have to live in the property for a year and they can never have owned property anywhere in the world previously. So and the penalties for false declaration are very significant if that's done incorrectly. The other exemptions might be for a new home build, but again, the total price has to be less than $750,000 for land and building, which is the way that land prices are here. It's
rare.
Less common for sure. And sometimes there's exemptions for transfers between parents to child, something like that. So you should talk to your lawyer or notary to see if there is an exemption available for you, but largely property transfer tax is a very big expense that a lot of people may not be prepared for when they're first looking. That is where a mortgage broker, though, will help them in that. They will have talked to them about additional closing costs. The realtor has already talked to them about that because it's right in the contract of purchase and sale. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to them when they come and see us, but if they're just looking at this video and starting to talk about buying a house, keep that in mind. That calculation is important.
Yeah, wonderful. The market in 2021 and 2022 saw tons of offers coming in subject free. What are some of the repercussions of that? And, you know, how is this affecting home buyers?
So as you know, subjects are really there to protect the buyer. They don't protect the seller, they protect the buyer. So we saw an entire couple years of purchases that were being done without any subjects. It was a result of the market and completely understandable, but the problem is that it wasn't allowing people to do due diligence before making the purchase. The housing prices were high and they were going very quickly, so that meant people were trying to make offers without being able to check and see on the things that we would typically ask them to check on. For example, things that we've seen, a good example might be water damage. Somebody is now doing a reno of the basement, they're pulling off the walls, there's black mold. All of a sudden you see that there was water damage and that wasn't disclosed on the disclosure statement. We'll see a buyer come back to us and say, hey, now what can I do about it?
Do I have any recourse?
Exactly. The fact is people can have recourse. It'll be dependent on the facts of the case, but also chasing that money is very expensive. So now you're talking about hiring a lawyer to sue another party and possibly win or lose on that. So those are the repercussions. Oftentimes I get calls and in the end we ask people, is it worth it to you to chase that? And it's just a result of a market that was really out of everybody's control at that time. So again, it goes back to that old buzzword, due diligence. If you can do it, you should. It'll protect you in the end as a buyer.
Yeah, makes sense. Ashley, where can people find you and your wonderful services?
So we have a website and Facebook and Instagram like everybody else. So our website is burgersmithurdahl.ca. You can email me at ashley@bsulaw.ca or call us at 250-334-2416.
Amazing. We'll be sure to include those in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time today. This was
I really appreciate it.
Very educational and we just really appreciate your time and expertise.
Thank you.